What's up guys, this is Eric Vasquez here with a brand new tutorial for you today from Design Cuts. Now in this tutorial we're going to be creating an art class flyer design using the all-purpose textures and patterns collection featuring world-class patterns and textures from artists such as Nasty Art, Joe Fallon, Stock Mamba, Alex Green Art, and Eclectic Anthology. Now in addition to this bundle, we're going to be using some free fonts and brushes to bring it all together. So if you're ready to get started, then let's jump right in and fire up Photoshop. The first thing we're going to do here is create a new document, and let's start by giving our document a name. So we're just going to type in art class flyer design, and then we want to make sure that our document is 5 inches wide by 7 inches tall, has a resolution of 300 pixels per inch, is in RGB color mode, and has a background contents of white, and then go ahead and hit create. The first thing you'll notice here when you create your new document is that you only have a single locked layer. So let's double click on that layer just to unlock it and then hit OK. The first thing we're going to do here is bring in a nice paper texture from Eclectic Anthology. And to do that, I'll just come up to File, Place Embedded, and then we're going to navigate to the file that we want to bring in. Now you guys will have a freebies folder that comes with this tutorial, and yours will probably look a little bit different than mine, but the resources and everything else that we're going to be using are completely the same. Okay, so I'm going to find the paper and then click on Place to bring it into my file. And you'll notice right away that it has this bounding box around it, which allows us to basically scale this, reposition it, rotate it, whatever we want to do before we place it into our design. I'm just going to hold down the Alt, Option, and Shift keys and drag outwards from any of the four corners to scale it up a bit, and then maybe slide it over to the right a bit as well. Now once you're happy with the size and position of your texture, you can press Return to apply the changes. Alright, so now that we have this layer in here, now that we have this texture, we can just go ahead and scrap that layer 0 because we now have our background that's going to serve as our base layer. Alright, now let's come back up to File and choose Place Embedded once again. And this time, what we're looking for is the roller texture from Stock Mamba, which looks pretty cool. It's just a little bit of a nice grungy pattern. And again, you have the bounding box here, so we're going to scale it. Hold Alt, Option, and Shift and drag outwards from any of the four corners. And maybe position it somewhere around here. As you can see, this just adds a nice little bit of grit to our image. Okay, so what we want to do now is make it a little bit more subtle because we don't want quite that much contrast. So let's double click on this layer to bring up our layer styles, and then check off the color overlay option. Now for the fill color here, you can see at the moment it's this bright purple color, but we're going to change that to instead use the hex value AB856F. Alright, so that's kind of this nice like brown beige color here. Once we have that set up, all we have to do is hold the Shift key, click on the paper below, and now click on this little folder icon at the bottom of the layers palette to put it into a group folder. Double click the group 1 text, and we'll just rename this folder Background. Okay, so now that we have our background set up, we're ready to begin bringing in some other elements for our flyer here. Now, you should have with this tutorial, with the freebies, some brushes, all right? And these are free brushes that come from brusheasy.com. But in order to load the brushes, I'm going to walk you guys through it. So the first thing you want to do is come up to the Edit menu and choose Presets, Preset Manager. Now, I've already got these two sets loaded up here, but if you don't have them loaded, all you would do is go to Load, and then navigate to the folder containing your brushes, and then just choose Open. Now, if I do that, it's just going to open another copy. So I can just grab those and choose Delete, because I only need one instance of those brushes. But this does look a little bit different because I'm using a newer version of Photoshop, but the preset manager and everything else like that is the same. But what's nice about this, and what I like about it, is that you're able to kind of see, you know, just the brushes from this set. I think in the older versions of Photoshop, it's all the brushes in the same panel here. Alright, but once you've done that, just go ahead and hit Done. So what we're going to do with these brushes here is first create a new layer, which you can do by clicking on this icon in the bottom of the layers palette right next to the trash can. And then we're going to press the letter B on the keyboard. Now I actually have this brush selected already, but let's do a few other things first. I'm going to press D on the keyboard, and that's just going to reset my colors to my default colors of black and white. We want to make sure that we have black set as our foreground color. If you don't, if for some reason you have white, you can see over here on the side, you can just toggle those colors by pressing the letter X on the keyboard. Alright, but once you have black as your foreground color, what we're going to do is then click on our brushes panel over here on the right, and then choose the brushes tab. We don't want to mess with the settings just yet. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is open up our tears brushes. Click the arrow to expand that. And we're going to choose tear 1. All right, now let's come over here to the settings. And you'll see by default, this brush wants to go vertically. And we don't really want it to rip the page like that. We actually want it to go across. We want it to be horizontal. So in order to fix that, all we have to do is change the angle. So I'm going to come in here, change the angle from 0 to 90, and we're all set. So now you can just close that, come over here, and then let's make sure that our opacity and flow are both set to 100 because we don't want it to be opaque at all. We just want solid black. Now let's go ahead and click and just see what happens. Okay, so there you go. We have our first torn paper brush. Now we're going to double click on layer 1 over here and just call this layer tear 1. And now I can create a second layer, press B again, and then come back to your brushes panel over here. And this time we're going to choose tear 3. Okay, so it's going to be our second tear. All right, and this time we're going to do the same thing and change the angle from 0 to 90 to make sure that it runs across instead of vertically. And let's actually make it so this torn part that you're seeing here is on the bottom instead of the top. I think just to do that, we'll just enter a -90 instead. And there you go. Now the rip is along the bottom of the brush, which is exactly what we want. So before we go ahead and just make that tear, press the letter X on the keyboard so you have solid white. And now just click your mouse and you should have your second tear. Okay, now we just want to make sure that this layer is below tear 1. So I'm just going to click and drag it down one spot here in the layers palette. And you guys will see that as I go along, the order of your layers when you're doing this kind of thing is pretty important. All right, so I'm just going to hold the shift key and tap the arrows down a little bit to see if I can get any more height out of that. And what you can do actually, if you want to move this down, if I hold the shift key and tap the down arrow, you can see that there's a gap in here. So to fix that, I'm just going to press Command J to duplicate this layer, and then hold shift and tap the up arrow just to move that copy up a little bit. Now I can hold shift, select both of these layers together, and then press Command Control plus E on the keyboard to merge them into one layer. Now I'll double click the layer 1 copy text and rename this layer layer 2. Okay, let's do that one more time. Create another new layer, bring this layer below tear 2, press B on the keyboard to get your brush, and now over here in your brushes, come back to the tab. Let's try a brush from the torn paper brushes folder. Okay, I'm just going to grab number 3, and if you look over here in your settings, we actually don't need to change the angle of this brush because this set is actually going the way that we want it to. So we don't have to even do anything there. So I'm just going to click on that to close the tab, press the letter X to switch back to black, and now I'm just going to click to make that tear. All right, and as you can see, there's still a little bit of a gap here in between the two pieces, so let me just hold the shift key and tap the down arrow to position that where I want, and then press Command and J on the keyboard, hold shift and tap the up arrow a few times, just to move that copy behind it. All right, now we're going to select both layers by holding shift and clicking on them, and then press Command Control plus E to merge them together. Double click the layer 1 copy text over here in your layers palette, and rename this layer tear 3. All right, hopefully you guys are with me so far. We're doing pretty good. Now, the reason that we're using these tears is because we wanted a fun and unique way to kind of divide this flyer up into sections. So what we're going to do is design each of these sections independently of one another. Let's start with this first section up here. All right, we want to put an image in this torn paper shape. So to do that, I'll do the same thing I did before, come up to File, Place Embedded. And this time I'm going to navigate to finding the chalk background from Joe Fallon, which is BG9, and then choose Place. What we want to do first is maybe just scale it up a little bit, hold the Alt Option and Shift keys, and just scale it up. And now I'm going to rotate this as well. So before I commit to these changes, I'm going to hold the Control key, click my mouse, and then choose Rotate 90 degrees clockwise. All right, now I can press Return. But the problem is that now this is taking up our entire image, but we only want it to be visible inside of the tear 1 layer. So to do that, we'll click on BG9 over here in the Layers palette, hold the Control key, click on the layer, and choose Create Clipping Mask. Now, that's exactly what we want, and you can see I can still click on the layer here and move it around inside, but I'm only seeing it inside of that layer. Okay, so that's one of the nice things about using a clipping mask. Okay, so now what we're going to do is select the tear 1 layer, press Command J to duplicate it, and you'll see that when I make a copy, now the copy is the one that's linked to BG9. So that means that I can take this layer and move it on top of BG9, and it's now covering it. But we don't want to see this black layer here. We're actually going to apply a shadow effect, and that's all that we want to see. So here's a cool trick. You guys can lower the fill to 0, and now we'll go ahead and double click on this layer. At the moment, it's invisible. But if we check off inner shadow, and we apply a couple of layer styles here, that will still remain visible. All right, so we're going to use solid black, normal for the blending mode, and then let's just make the opacity maybe around 50, 54%, somewhere around there. We can leave the angle set to 90. We want the distance to be set to about 25, 26, that's fine. Choke of 0, and a size of 68. Okay, and you can see over here in the little preview window what's happening. So now if I click OK, let me zoom in a bit. You can see that we have this nice shadow effect that is visible. All right, and if I turn that layer on and off, this layer only contains the shadow effect. Okay, so that's a nice way to just add a little bit of depth here. Now what we're going to do is work on the middle tear and just bring in the background for that. So we'll come up to File, Place Embedded, and now we're looking for some of our watercolor backgrounds, which will serve as our second section. All right, the first one we're going to import here is Texture 21 from Alex Green Art. Go ahead and hit Place. And now I'm pretty zoomed in here, so I want to zoom out a bit so I can see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to press Command and the minus key so that I can zoom out. And now what I want to do is maybe just rotate this a little bit, hold the Alt, Option, and Shift keys and scale it up, make it a bit larger. Okay, and then just play around with the positioning a bit more. Okay, maybe somewhere around there looks all right. Somewhere, yeah, let's try that, and then press Return. As I mentioned, the order of our layers is very important here. So just like we made our background for our chalk section, we're going to do that with the watercolors as well. So I'm going to move this layer just above Tear 2, hold Control, click on the layer, and choose Create Clipping Mask. Now I can move this around inside, and you guys can, play around with the positioning or the size a little bit more. Okay, so let's do that again. Go to File, Place Embedded. And this time we're going to bring in another texture. So now that we have Texture 2, let's go ahead and bring in Texture 19. I want to make sure that it's clipped inside of the other ones. And to do that, all I'm going to do is click and drag this layer in between Texture 21 and Tear 2. Okay, I'll move it up one spot in the layer palette here, which you can do by pressing Command and the right bracket on the keyboard. And you'll now see that this still has a clipping mask applied to it. If I press Command and the right bracket again, it no longer has that, but it's actually clipped inside of the background, the chalk layer. See? But I can't see it because it's underneath, so there you go. So just be careful when you're doing that. Okay, but I want to move it above Texture 21. And now I'm inside here, so I can play around with the size and the positioning just a little bit more. I'm going to scale this one way up and maybe put it somewhere around here. Press Return, and then let's go ahead and change the blending mode from normal to multiply. All right, so I just want the corner to get a little bit darker over here just to add a little splash of contrast. Now let's go ahead and bring in our third watercolor texture. So go to File, Place Embedded, and we'll now bring in Texture 2. Okay, now for this layer, I actually want to rotate it. So again, I can hold the Control key, click on it, and choose Rotate 90 degrees. Or you could go counterclockwise and do that as well. And then I'm just going to scale this up, maybe somewhere around there. And again, let's make sure that this is inside of our group here with the clipping masks applied. So just click and drag that inside. And we can place this layer in between Texture 21 and Texture 19. All right, and let's go ahead and change the blending mode of this layer from normal to luminosity. And then it just adds a nice bit of texture while retaining the color from the layer below it. Okay, so something like that looks pretty good. And let's also go ahead and maybe just lower the opacity of this layer a little bit, maybe to about 50% on Texture 19. Then we can play around with the positioning a little bit more just to see where we want some of that contrast to come in. So now that we have our three watercolor textures here clipped to the Tear 2 layer, let's go ahead and apply an adjustment layer. Select the Tear 2 layer, come down here to the adjustment layer icon and choose Hue Saturation. And if I just close the properties for a second, you'll see that it has now been added just above the Tear 2 layer. But we actually want this to be above all of our texture layers so that it affects all three of them. So if you remember from before, the keyboard shortcut is Command Control and the right bracket on your keyboard. Just go ahead and press that a few times, but make sure that it's still clipped, so it's at the top of this clipping chain here. All right, and then we'll double click on that just to bring up our properties. And what we're going to do here is just change the hue and saturation values. So let's make the hue maybe about -4 or 5, and then we'll make the saturation about -8. All right, so just kind of subtle, and then I can close that. All right, now we're going to duplicate that layer, so press Command J to make a copy. And now when I do that, you'll see this is no longer part of our clipping mask chain here. But to put it back inside, again, all I have to do is press Command and the left bracket to move it down, and then Command and the right bracket to move it up one spot. So the keyboard shortcuts are really handy when you're dealing with clipping mask in this sort of way. All right, this time, let's change the hue to 62. All right, and then we'll move the saturation up to about 12. Not -12, just 12. Okay, so you can see now that it's affecting all of those layers underneath. So let's move on now. Select the Tier 2 layer once again, and this time we'll come back down to the adjustment layer icon and choose solid color. So type in the hex value EA9C94. All right, and it's kind of this like light pink color here. And then again, we want this to be above everything else. So press Command Control and the right bracket several times until it's above all the other layers in this clipping mask chain. And now what we're going to do is leave the blending mode set to normal and just lower the opacity to about 18 to 20%. All right, something like that. Now we have all of these adjustments applied to this Tier 1 layer. And if I turn that layer on and off, it's turning off the visibility of everything that is clipped to it. And you can see what's happening there in the layers palette when I do that. So you can come in here and still manipulate, the size and position of any of these texture layers that you want. All right, just to move that around a bit more if you want to, and you can change that. But what we're going to do now is, again, select the Tier 2 layer and press Command J. And just like our Tier 1 group, when I did that, the copy is now the one that is clipped to all of these other layers. So we're going to take layer 2 and just drag it up here and place it above everything else. Now, what we're going to do is lower the fill once again to 0. Double click on the layer, and this time we're going to add a drop shadow. So let's change the blending mode of our drop shadow to multiply. Lower the opacity to about 48%. And then we want to change the angle. Uncheck this box here that says use global light, and you can type in an angle of 120. Let's make it a distance of 6, a spread of about 5, and a size of about 7. And then go ahead and hit OK. Now, initially, you won't really see anything happening because the layer directly below this Tier 3 group, is solid black. So you're not going to see a black shadow on a black, brush. But once we start to add some textures into this group here, that will be more apparent. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just, try to make sense of these a little bit. So I'm going to come all the way to the top of the layers palette, and my first 3 layers up here are for this chalkboard group. So I'm going to select the top layer, hold the Shift key, and then click on Tier 1 Copy, and then press Command G to put that into a group folder. Double click the Group 1 text and just rename this folder Chalk. Now I'll select Tier 2 directly below, come down and select the Tier 2 Copy so that I have all the layers associated with this second strip. Now I can press Command G to put them into a folder, double click, and this is going to be our watercolor group. So let's go ahead and type out watercolor. Now we can focus on this third group here. Okay, but I think I want to extend it a little bit, so I'm going to press Command J, hold the Shift key and tap it down just a couple clicks, and then press Command E to merge it with the layer below. All right, so now let's do what we've been doing. Come back to File and choose Place Embedded so that we can now bring in our marble texture. All right, so let's see. This one is from Nasty Art, and it's called Marble 29. And we're going to choose Place to bring that in here. All right. Now, again, you can, transform this however you like. I'm going to hold down Alt, Option, and Shift and maybe scale it up a little bit. All right, somewhere around there looks pretty good. Just maybe move it down a bit as well, and then press Return when you're happy with the size and positioning. Now hold the Control key and click on the layer and choose Create Clipping Mask to clip this layer to the one directly below it. Now again, you can press Command T to come in here and maybe move this layer around a little bit more. Maybe you want to scale it up a bit, reposition it however you like, that's totally fine, and then press Return. Okay, so now that we have this in here, let's select the Tear 3 layer, come down to the adjustment layer icon, and add a levels adjustment. Now we want this to be above our Marble 29 layer, so just click and drag it up one spot, and make sure that it has this little arrow next to it indicating that it's part of the clipping mask chain. Now we're going to take this left slider here, and we're just going to bring it in a bit so that it's set to around 29. All right, and that's just going to boost the contrast a little bit. And then we're going to change this middle slider so that it's set to around 0.85, all right, like that. And if I turn the visibility of that layer on and off, you can see what it's doing. Now I'll select the Tear 3 layer once again, come back to the adjustment layer icon, and now choose Hue Saturation. And then let's use the keyboard shortcut Command in the right bracket to move this up 2 times. Now for this layer, what we want to do is just make the saturation maybe around -32 or 34, somewhere about there. Looks pretty good. Right, and then I'm just going to nudge that up a little bit, something like that, and tap it over. And we're looking pretty good, guys. So at this point, we have each of our strips set up here. So I'm going to select the Tear 3 layer, hold the Shift key, and select the Hue Saturation Adjustment layer. Then press Command G to put it into a folder, double-click the Group 1 text, and just change the name of this folder to Marble. All right, and again, now you can see the drop shadow that we applied to our watercolor strip here, because our third section is no longer filled with solid black. All right, so we've basically set up these 3 folders. So I'm going to select the Marble folder, hold Shift, and click on the chalk folder. Now I can zoom out and move all 3 of these up or down together, however you want to reposition this. Before we move on, I'm just going to come back in here, select my roller texture really quick, and then just play around with the opacity a little bit. I want to lower it a little bit, maybe somewhere around 60%, just because it was standing out a little bit too much. Okay, but hopefully you guys are with me so far. I know that can be a little bit confusing as far as, the order of layers and everything like that, but there's a lot of useful, tips and tricks that we've covered here that you guys will be able to apply using clipping masks and, layers with zero fill that you just want to use to show layer styles through. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. But let's get ready to move on to adding some text to each of these sections. Okay, so what we're going to do next is click this small arrow on the chalk folder to expand just the contents of that folder. I'm going to double click on this Properties tab up here just to get rid of that, and then come inside your chalk folder by selecting the Tear 1 layer, and then add a new layer on top. From here, press T on the keyboard to get your type tool, and we can begin adding some text. Alright, so I'm just going to click here and type out the word chalk in all uppercase letters. And the next thing I'm going to do is click maybe 2 or 3 times just to highlight this word. And we want to bring up our character panel. So to do that, come up to the window menu and choose character. And for this first section here, I'm going to be using a font called Write Chalk, which is a totally free font that you guys can download from dafont.com. And the first thing we're going to do here is change the color. So click on this color box, and then for the hex value here, let's change it to 9FDCF5, which is this kind of like nice blue. Okay, and then what we're going to do next is change the size. So the size is this box here, which you can change by clicking and dragging over that uppercase and lowercase t, or the small caps T rather. And we want to make this set to around 37.42. So you can also just manually type in a value. And then over here we also have the tracking, which I'm just going to move to maybe about -20. And there we go. All right, so we now have this nice looking chalk font, which I'm just going to move over here towards the right. So the next thing I'm going to do is press Command J to duplicate that layer, and then just move this layer up. Press T once again and click inside to change the text from chalk to learn how to work with. Okay, obviously it's a little bit too big, so I can't even see all the typos that I've made in here, but I'm basically just going to click a few times now to highlight it. Okay, and now we're going to change the point size. Instead of using 37.42, because that's obviously too large, we're going to make it about 19.75. Okay, and then we can use that. All right. Actually, that's still a little bit too big. Let's go a little bit smaller. I'm just going to double click in there, make this around 12. There we go. That's a better size. All right, now I'm just going to hold Shift and tap that down a few times. Select the chalk text, hold Shift and move it down a few times. And I want to align these two after I fix some of these mistakes, obviously. So learn how to work with. There we go. Clicking one, then holding Command and clicking the other. And now on this top toolbar up here, you have some of these align tools. So I'm going to click on this one that says Align Horizontal Centers, just to make sure that those are centered. All right, and then while I have them both selected, I can move them together while holding the Shift key and using my arrows to move them around. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is duplicate one of these layers. So press Command J, move this layer over here to the left, grab your type tool, click inside, and type out the word Monday. All right, now while we're in here and we have our text highlighted, you can also press Command A to highlight all of the text inside here. And we're now going to change the color. Instead of this blue to maybe a yellowish color, we'll type in EBF183. And this one we can make a little bit larger. So let's make this one 19.75. And we're going to set our leading here to 6.77 because we're going to add a second line of text. So just click your cursor here after the Y in Monday, then press Return on the keyboard to create a second line of text. And now we can type out March 5th at 2 p.m. Okay? Now, now that I'm looking at that, it looks like the line spacing is obviously a little bit too tight. Okay, and this line of text here is too large. So the first thing, let's go ahead and fix the point size. All right, so I'm going to change it from 19.75 to 10. And now all I have to do is click my cursor anywhere in here in this text box and press Command A to highlight all of the text. And now we can manually control the leading over here in our character panel. Let me just bring that here so you can see it. And you'll see you get a hand with a left and right arrow. So if I just click to the right, it's going to give me a little more space. Click to the left, it tightens it up a bit. Somewhere about there looks pretty good. All right, you just want to have a comfortable amount of space. But you can also use a keyboard shortcut that I like to use to do that as well, which I'll show you guys right now. You just have to press Alt-Option and the up arrow to tighten the leading, or Alt-Option and the down arrow to increase the leading there. All right. Now let's press Command J to duplicate that layer one more time. Move it over here, click inside with the type tool, press Command A to select it all, then delete, and then just type out a backslash. Okay, and what we're going to do here is press Command T. Just make it, try to make it vertical, try to make it straight. And then we're going to move it over here so that we can use this as a divider. We want to make it a little bit taller though, so press Command T again. And now hold the Control key and just drag up a little bit more. Right, something like that looks pretty good. Okay, so we now have our first section over here. Learn how to work with chalk on Monday, March 5th at 2 p.m. All right, so let's move on. Now we can begin working on our watercolor section next. So I'm going to open that folder, select the Tear 2 layer, and then add another new layer on top. Press T on the keyboard to get my type tool. And this time I'm going to type out, actually before I do anything, let me get my character panel back. And right here where it says Write Chalk, I want to show you guys this other typeface that we're going to be using instead called Garden Grown, which is a really nice font, has a lot of personality and character to it, and it feels like a nice watercolor font. So once we have that, I'll type out the word watercolors, all right, just like that. And now I can click inside here, click on the color box, and let's change the color this time to 9F4C6A. All right, and we'll make the size about 52, let's say 52.32. Okay, somewhere about there looks pretty good. And now what we're going to do is just move this over here a little bit, move the character panel to the side so we can see what we're doing. And let's just reduce the fill of this layer to about 80%. All right, so it's going to make it slightly opaque. Okay, from here what we can do is double click on the layer. We're going to add an inner glow layer style. And what we're going to do here is make sure the blending mode is set to multiply. We want the opacity set around 30%. And then for the color, let's go ahead and enter a value of 7A2836, which is this more saturated kind of, rose color. Now, as you can see here, you can see where the inner glow is. If I poke that eyeball out, you can see what it's doing. It's just adding a nice edge to our text. All right, now with that text layer selected, go ahead and press Command J to duplicate it one more time, just to intensify that effect. All right, it makes it a little bit more bold and contrasty. Okay, so now let's duplicate this layer once again. Move a copy up. I'm just dragging it while holding Shift so that it stays aligned with my first text layer. Press T to click inside. And now we're going to change this text to Learn How to Use. I'll press Command A to select all my text in there. Turn to my character panel, Or if you guys like, you can actually modify some of these parameters right over here in the properties. So I just open the properties tab, and you can make a lot of the same changes that way as well. So you can see I have, the size, the font family, the style, as well as the color. So pretty much everything else that you would need to change here can be done in the properties. All right, so let's just come in here and maybe change this text because we don't want it to be quite as large. So we're going to change this one to about 28.32 for the point size. Hold the Shift key and tap my left arrow to move it over. You tap it up a few times, somewhere about there, and then press Command J to duplicate that layer. All right, so you should now have 4 text layers here inside of your watercolor folder. So I'm going to select the top one, hold Shift and select the bottom one, and now hold the Shift key and tap the down arrow a few times, maybe a little bit over to the right, so that we can reposition that whole group of text. Okay, so now one more time, we're going to select our top text layer here, duplicate it by pressing Command J, and let's drag this copy over here towards the right. All right, I'm going to click inside now, and I'm going to type out the word Tuesday in all caps, and I'm actually going to change the style here. So I'm going to press Command A to select all of this, and then let's change the style. So over here in the character panel or the properties, next to your font family, Garden Grown, you'll see it says regular, and that's the style. So if you click that arrow, you can change it to, instead of regular, to caps. All right, and that's just a little bit easier to read there. Now let's click the color and just make this slightly different color, nothing too drastic, but we'll make it 861650. Press return. And now what we want to do is change the size to about 22.56 and make the leading over here 20.65 and then press return. Okay, now what we're going to do is just click our cursor over here next to the Tuesday, press return to come down to a second line, and then we're going to type out March 6 in all caps. Okay, so you have Tuesday, March 6th. Now let's add a little divider here. So I'm going to press Command J to duplicate that layer, move it over here towards the left, press T to get my type tool, click inside, and then delete. And we're going to add an M dash, which is just this extended dash. And you can do that by pressing Alt, Option, Shift, and minus on the keyboard. Now once you've done that, I'm going to grab my move tool over here just to deselect it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and then use the hand tool by pressing the space bar just to navigate to the part of the image you want to see better. And now I can press Command T, and I'm just going to rotate this just by holding the Shift key and dragging around the corner. You can see how your cursor changes there. You can rotate like that. And then hold the Alt, Option, Shift key and drag outwards from any of the 4 corners of this bounding box. All right, press return. And now when I press Command T again, all I have to do is make this a little bit taller, and you can hold the Control key too, just so it doesn't like snap or anything, and then press return once you're happy with the size and the placement of your divider. We now have our second section for the watercolors complete. All right, so let's move on to adding our text for the marble section. All right, I'm going to expand the contents of the marble folder, come inside, add a new layer on top, then let's zoom in, press T to get our type tool. And before I do anything, I'm going to press the letter X on the keyboard so that I have a solid white foreground color. And now I will click my cursor and type out the word marble in all caps and press Command A to select the text. Now over here in my character panel, I'm now going to change this font from Garden Grown to Authority. All right, Authority is this cool distress typeface, and it seems like it'll work pretty well for this section. All right, so the first thing we're going to do here is make sure that it's solid white, which it is, and we're going to change the point size of the font to 47.52, just like that. All right, and now we'll double click on the layer, and I'm going to add an outer glow. Okay, so for this, let's go ahead and set the blending mode to normal. We want the opacity to be around 19%, pretty subtle, 19 or 20 is fine. And now let's make sure that the spread is 0, and the size is set to about 16. Okay, and then go ahead and click on the color of the glow and just make it black. All right, so you can kind of see off to the side here, if I check that preview button, you can see that it's just helping it pop off the background a little bit more, just to help with the readability. Just go ahead and click OK to apply the changes. And now we're just going to move this text over to the right side. Press Command J to duplicate that layer. And now we'll move it up a bit, press T, click inside here, and we'll change this text instead to working with, press Command A to select all. And now again, we'll change the style from regular distressed to distressed italic, all right, just to add a little bit of variation there. And now we can also go ahead and change the size of this to about 18.72. All right, and there we go. So I'm just going to move that up a bit, press Command J to duplicate it, and move this text over to the left. Press T to get your type tool, click inside here, and change it from distressed italic back to regular distressed. Okay, and now we're just going to type out instead the word Wednesday to tell them the time of our next class. And now what we can do, grab the move tool to deselect it, press Command J, then Command Control and the left bracket to move this layer below the original Wednesday layer. And then hold the Shift key and tap the down arrow a few times. And now press T again, click inside here, and change this from Wednesday to March 7th. Okay, now I'm going to close the character panel. And we have all of our text set up. So let me just play around with the positioning a little bit. I'm going to select the Wednesday text layer, hold Shift and grab March 7th. Then I'm going to hold the Shift key and just tap this over a little bit, just so it fits nice and comfortably in the space. And then do the same thing with the working with and marble layer. Okay, somewhere about there looks pretty good. All right, and let's come back to our chalk folder for a second. Grab the slash, the Monday, and the, just the slash and the Monday. Maybe tap that over a little bit there too. All right, just so it's not so close to the left edge. And now we are ready to move on to bringing in some objects and adding a title to our art class flyer. All right, so what I'm going to do now is come back to my freebies folder and just press Command O to open this file. I'm going to navigate to the freebies, and what we want to do is come into this Design Cut Scene Creator folder and choose the brushes PSD file and then click Open. Now you'll see that I have 3 brushes here, but the one I'm concerned with is the middle brush. So I'm just going to poke the eyeballs out for the other 2. Click to move the tab out here and move it to the side. And I'm going to click and drag this brush into my working document. Now I can press Command, Control, and the tilde key to open up my other panel, and then close out, choose Don't Save. And now we have a brush here at the top of our layers palette. So the first thing I want to do is get rid of this green label. So to do that, I don't know if you guys know how to do this or not. If you do, then I'm just going to show you again, but hold the Control key and click on the layer. Now you can color code any of the layers that you want at any time, but for now, just because I have a little bit of OCD and it bothers me, I'm going to choose no color. Okay, and now I'm just going to also make this all caps like that. And now we can play around with the size and the placement of our brush. So press Command T, and now I'm going to press Control and click on the layer and choose Rotate 90 degrees clockwise, and then hold Alt, Option, and Shift and drag this layer out. Okay, somewhere about there looks pretty good. And we just want it to be, cropped off to the side so that you only see the top of it kind of coming in here. All right, now let's open this folder to expand the contents, come inside, and come down to the adjustment layer icon and add a hue saturation layer. Okay, and we want this to be clipped to the brush. So just like before, hold the Control key, click on the layer, and choose Create Clipping Mask. And all we're going to do here is just boost the saturation up to about maybe 40 or 45, just to make those colors pop a bit more. Okay, and that's it. Now let's go ahead and add another new layer. Press T on the keyboard to get your type tool, and then click, and we're going to type out art classes in upper and lowercase. But you can see that by default it actually has my chalk font. We have to make sure that we highlight the text before we change it. So let's go ahead and change this to 5 boroughs. Okay, and now we can click on this color box here, or inside of our character panel. Right, so you have several places where you can change the color. Anywhere you see that yellow box is an area where you can change the color. And let's go ahead and click inside, and we're going to change this to the hex value 54636C. All right, and then for the size, I want to make it about 100.32. Okay, somewhere about there. And then I'm just going to move this over in the middle. Right, somewhere about there, looks pretty good. And I'm not too worried about the brush right now because I can always move that later. So the next thing we're going to do is double click on this layer. And just like we did with our watercolor layer, let's actually add an inner glow effect. Okay, so for the settings here, make sure that it's set to multiply, and we can have this be around 30%. Click here inside of the color box, and we're just going to change this to the hex value 0D1A61, and then go ahead and press return 2 times to apply the changes. All right, and there you go. So now what we're going to do is add another new layer, press Command, Control, and the left bracket to move it below our art classes layer, and then press T to get your type tool and click along here at the bottom. Now, for this, I actually don't want the font to be so huge. I can tell just by the cursor already that this type is going to be very large. So before I do anything here, let me change the point size from 100.32 to 18.72. All right, now my cursor is much smaller and more manageable. All right, so what I'm going to do is type out in all caps, visit designcuts.com for more info. All right, then press Command A to select all. And I think for this, instead of 5 burrows, I'm going to go back to using our garden grown caps typeface. And let's just go ahead and make the color the same as our title, which it is. And then we just want to make sure that that is nice and centered. So I'm going to press Command T, move it over here until it kind of snaps into place. And there you go. So now I'm going to zoom out a bit. And obviously I don't want this brush, overlapping. So I'm just going to move things around a little bit, close the Properties tab. The first thing I'm going to do is click on the brush folder, hold the Shift key, and then click on the marble folder. And then hold Shift and just tap it down a few times like that. All right, now I can take the brush, move that down a little bit. And then of course, you can move things around more if you wish, maybe have the art classes here, or you can even have, the brush come in front if you want, just so it overlaps a little bit like that. That could be kind of nice too. All right, play around with it and try to get some more depth out of it. I think having the brush come in front of it is actually kind of cool. So maybe I'll just keep that in there for now. So what we're going to do next is just click on the art classes title, hold Shift and select the designcuts.com layer, press Command G to put it into a folder, double click the group 1 text, and we're just going to call this TT for title treatment. Now we're almost there, guys. We're in the home stretch here. So let's select our brush group folder here, come down to the adjustment layer icon, and we're going to add an overall adjustment. So the first one we're going to apply is a hue saturation. And let's boost the saturation to about 12, just to enhance the colors a little bit overall. And then come back down once again and choose curves. All right, now for the curves, we're going to click around here in the middle to add a point. And then you'll see you have an input and output setting. So let's go ahead and change the input value to about 134. And the output can be set to around 126. Okay, and then we're going to add a second point up here in the upper right quadrant, right, somewhere in the middle there of these top 4 boxes. And then for this, let's make the input 187 and the output 183. Okay, and that's just going to enhance the contrast, give us a little bit more pop there, as they say. That's a technical term. All right, and now all I'm going to do is select the curves adjustment layer, hold Shift and select the hue saturation layer below, press Command G to put these into a group folder, and let's go ahead and call these global adjustments because it's affecting everything in the design. And now from here, you can just go in, you can move things around if you want, but that about wraps up our art class flyer design. I think it looks really cool. We really made great use of a lot of these textures, and be sure to check out the full bundle for the all-purpose textures and patterns collection. It's definitely a game changer for you guys and will help you out in all of your design projects. You can get the full bundle now over at designcuts.com. Once again, my name is Eric Vasquez. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.